International Holocaust Remembrance Day, which is on this date because in 1945 on this day, the Soviet Red Army liberated Auschwitz. We will hear from 4 or 5 speakers and listen to 3 readings. And I will introduce speakers prior to them addressing the meeting. My name is Ruth Stiles and I'm the chair of the Communist Party of Britain. Whilst questions can be posted in the chat, please remember what this event is about. It's about commemoration, and ensure your questions are relevant. This event is being recorded and will be live streamed on Facebook. Comrades, anti-Semitism has been around for centuries. A royal decree issued by Edward I in July 1290 sought the expulsion of all Jews from England by no later than November of that year. This edict remained throughout the Middle Ages and was the culmination of 200 years of anti-Semitism. Medieval England was particularly anti-Jewish, with many of the images and tropes surviving through to today. Today, our party issued a statement reaffirming our opposition to anti-Semitism and recalling the horrific scenes that confronted those liberating Auschwitz. The statement reminds us that at the end of the Second World War, the world was clear that mass murder lay at the very core of fascist ideology. But as time has moved on and the survivors become fewer, personal testimony and truth have become contested by historical revisionism, Holocaust denial, and the shameful theory of equivalence between the Nazi and other fascist regimes and their collaborators on the one side, and the Soviet Union and communist anti-fascist partisans on the other. This situation was made worse by the acceptance of a resolution at the European Parliament titled "On the Importance of European Remembrance of the Future of Europe" in August 2019. To their shame, Labour MEPs voted for this legitimisation of fascist revisionism. Comrades, we've seen a shameful growth in anti-Semitic attacks in Britain and worldwide. And at our party congress last November, it was decided to press the struggle against anti-Semitism and take the fight to the anti-Semites. It is a struggle that takes place in communities, in workplaces and online. A new education programme is being developed and party members have been put on alert to step up the struggle against anti-Semitism and maintain vigilance against anti-Semitic elements in anti-racist movements. In particular, we're concerned to take up the struggle with a new generation in danger of influence through internet sites that promote historical revisionism, Holocaust denial, and conspiracy theory. Communists have observed this day since its inception, and this year we show the Holocaust in its historical perspective. I would remind you that across Poland and stretching as far as Croatia, 40 concentration camps were built. Those held captive in Auschwitz were mainly Jewish, Poles, Romani and Soviet prisoners of war. 1.3 million were imprisoned and 1.1 million were killed in that terrible place. Nazi Germany invaded Soviet Union on the 22nd of June 1941. Hitler intended the campaign to be a war of racial and political annihilation. Forced starvation and mass murder were the methods, and civilians were the main target, none more so than the Polish and Soviet Jews, whose persecution began immediately. With the arrival of the Nazi army, the pogroms against Jewish people became widespread, especially in Ukraine, Belarus, and the Baltic states. But now we know that the Holocaust of bullets started in countries such as Lithuania and Estonia before the arrival of German troops and before the mass gassings in these death camps. 700,000 died in this way. Estonia and Lithuania lost 95% of their pre-war Jewish population in just 3 years. In the Baltic states, fascist, ultranationalist and anti-Soviet elements backed the Nazi invaders and joined in the pogroms. In Western Ukraine, Polish people were killed or expelled and Jews murdered. Conventional pogroms were more difficult to organise in Belarus, and the Nazis turned to murder by gassing. These actions resulted in the first use of the word genocide. The term was coined by Raphael Lemkin, a Pole who fled to the USA in 1941. He lost most of his family in the Holocaust and recognised the destruction of a nation or an ethnic group was a crime without a name. Genocide was formally adopted by the UN in 1948. In August 1942, the Nazis attacked Stalingrad, declaring upon their victory that all male residents would be killed. The victory of the Soviet army at Stalingrad was a decisive turn that led directly to the liberation of Auschwitz. Despite all the destruction witnessed by the Soviet troops and their pushback of the Germans, no one was prepared for what they witnessed on that day. Every year at the end of January, the UN pays tribute to the memory of the victims of the Holocaust and reaffirms its commitment to counter anti-Semitism, racism, and other forms of intolerance that may lead to group targeted violence. We are joining today in the commemoration organised by the Holocaust Memorial Day Trust, Unite Against Fascism, trade unions, and many others under the theme of One Day. The Trust encourages remembrance in a world scarred by genocide and calls for support to remember the 6 million Jews murdered during the Holocaust, alongside the millions of other people killed under Nazi persecution and in genocides in Cambodia, Rwanda, Bosnia, and Darfur. The Holocaust threatened the fabric of civilization, and genocide must be resisted by action every day. Our world often feels fragile and vulnerable, and we cannot be complacent. Prejudice and the language of hatred must be challenged by us all. Together, we must bear witness for those who endured genocide and honour the survivors and all those whose lives were changed with that beyond recognition. The lessons of anti-Semitism must be taken into our schools and workplaces. Trade unions can and must play an important role in this. We must continue to oppose all racism and fascism. And this includes the actions of the British government in its nationality and borders legislation, which will divide working class communities and persecute those fleeing imperialist wars, climate catastrophe and oppression. The Communist Party of Britain will play an active role alongside those who seek an end to racism, historical revisionism and Holocaust denial. Comrades, we salute and remember the brave people who fought and defeated the fascists and the anti-Semites in generations past and today, amongst whom are found many of our own members and supporters. Thank you for listening to me, comrades. I now call on Vicky Knight to do the first reading from Rabbi Israel Meir Lau's account as a Holocaust survivor who lost his parents and brother. Vicky, the floor is yours.
Good evening, comrades. The following is an excerpt from a letter of Rabbi Yisrael Meir Lau, the former Ashkenazi Chief Rabbi of Israel and the current chairman of Yad Vashem, the World Holocaust Remembrance Center in Jerusalem. 14th of July, 2008. In January 1945, my brother, Naftali, and I arrived at Buchenwald, concentration camp in Germany, where we'd been sent from the labour camp at Czestochowa, Poland. Soon after our arrival, I was separated from my brother, who was imprisoned in one of the blocks for Jews. I, then 7.5 years old, was moved to block number 8, not far from the camp's gate. I assumed the identity of a Polish non-Jewish child whose parents had been killed in the bombing of Warsaw and who by accident had been included in a transport of Jews ending up in Buchenwald. In Block 8, there was a Russian. Everyone knew him as Fyodor. He was then aged 18 to 20 and came from the town of Rostov in Russia. Fyodor knew that I was in fact Jewish and that I had a brother in another barrack at the camp. Yet his spirit was so sympathetic to me that his behaviour towards me exceeded all reasonable expectations under the prevailing conditions. He used, for example, to steal potatoes and almost every day would secretly light a fire between stones and make me potato soup. He unravelled the sweater of a dead inmate and out of the flesh-coloured wool made me earmuffs. In the early morning hours, the Germans subjected us to an appel, a prolonged roll call, during which we had to stand with our heads uncovered. In winter, in the region of Weimar, the temperatures fell far below zero, and we were all in imminent danger of freezing to death. Every night, before we went to sleep, Fyodor looked to see whether the woolen muffs covered my ears, so that during morning roll call, my ears would not freeze from the cold. On April the 11th, 1945, the American Army liberated Buchenwald. They bombed us from the air, and Fyodor grabbed my hand and we started to run out of the gates of the camp. At the same time, the Germans fired at the prisoners like mad from their watchtowers. Fyodor pulled me down to the ground and lay on top of me. He exposed himself and intentionally endangered his own life to save mine during those terrible hours. On May the 3rd, 1989, I visited the Kremlin with 5 other rabbis with the first delegation of rabbis from Israel, Europe, and the USA. We were received by the Secretary General of the Soviet Communist Party, Tengiz Mentashvili. According to the Hebrew calendar, this was the exact date, the 28th of the month of Nisan, of the liberation of Buchenwald, 44 years previously. I told him how a Russian had risked his life to save mine, not for one day or one night, but for over 3.5 months, a period that seemed like an eternity. Mentashvili had noted on a pad, Fyodor, Rostov, Buchenwald, April 11th, 1945. The next day, a notice appeared in Izvestia, the official Soviet gazette, asking Fyodor from Rostov to get in touch with the Kremlin through Comrade Kirill, the Soviet Assistant Foreign Minister. As far as I know, Fyodor never came forwards. As Buchenwald was amongst the first of the concentration camps, it's where the Nazis had imprisoned their political enemies, namely communists, even prior to the war. Inmates in the camp had established a well-organised resistance network, which was led by German political prisoners, including the German Communist Party. They succeeded in establishing a special children's barrack, Block 8, that accommodated youngsters sent to Germany for forced labour. And it was here that Fyodor, later known as Fyodor Mikhailichenko, was imprisoned. Years later, Rabbi Lau had managed to locate the daughters of the late Fyodor, who had since passed away. They recalled that their father had told them about the barrack at Buchenwald and about one little Polish boy in particular. Fyodor's daughters, Yulia Salotina and Yelena Belyeva, received the Righteous Among the Nations Medal on behalf of their father from Yad Vashem in 2009. Thank you.
Thank you, Vicky. Thank you for reading that. I now call upon Mo Yavetz to read an excerpt from the Victory Day Statement to 2020 by the veterans of the Union of World War II Fighters Against Nazism organisation in Israel. Mo, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. The following statement was originally published for Victory Day, the 9th of May, 2020, by the Veterans Union of World War II Fighters Against Nazism organization in Israel. This organization represents Red Army veterans and former partisans living in Israel, as well as defenders of the Siege of Leningrad and others who contributed to the war effort at home. They state, "Today, the generation of veterans who took part in the war against Nazism is enraged by the attempts of some European countries to belittle and deny the contribution made by the Soviet Union and the Red Army to the defeat of Nazism and to the liberation of those countries occupied by the Third Reich. We feel anger and disgust at the current tendencies of Holocaust denial and glorification of Nazism apparent in certain European countries. These include attempts to clear the name of the Nazi murderous organization, the SS, and especially the Waffen-SS, which were both charged for their war crimes and terror in the Nuremberg trials. And likewise, the collaborators and those who aided the Nazis in occupied Europe. These attempts give wind to a resurgence of neo-Nazi movements across Europe and indeed the world. Across parts of Eastern Europe, a war is being waged against the monuments commemorating the combatants who defeated Nazism. All the while, this generates a rise in anti-Semitism, as well as the worship of Nazi ideology, but ironically, also creates a lack of understanding as to why such doctrines are on the rise again. We will never forget the Holocaust of European Jewry. We call on the young men and women of today to safeguard the memory of the millions of combatants who were killed battling the Nazis, and the memory of the millions of Holocaust victims who were murdered in the ghettos, gas chambers, and camps during the Second World War. We ask you to carry the heroic memory of your grandfathers and grandmothers who fought in the ranks of the Red Army and made a meaningful contribution to the defeat of Nazism and to the salvation of European Jewry from annihilation.
Thank you, Mel, for your reading. I will now call upon our first speaker, who is Steve Silver. Steve is a former researcher and editor of Searchlight, the anti-fascist magazine, and he has been involved in anti-racist and anti-fascist work for over 25 years. Steve will talk about anti-Semitism today, I hope. Steve, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, comrades, and thank you for asking me to speak today. I'm going to be talking about modern anti-Semitism today, but the only way I can do that is to put it in context. And as we're all aware, the hostage taken at a synagogue in Colleyville, Texas, less than a fortnight ago, which was all over the international news, was an act of anti-Semitic terror, the threat of which is unfortunately very familiar to Jewish communities across the world. The hostage taker, a 44-year-old British Pakistani, armed with a pistol, demanded the release of Afia Siddiqui, a Pakistani national and alleged Al-Qaeda operative imprisoned in nearby Fort Worth for attempted murder and other crimes. The question of why Akram chose to take hostages in a synagogue rather than, say, a church or other institution seems to have mystified some commentators. And the answer is actually quite simple. He did it because they were Jewish. And it's the reason why there is tight security at synagogues and at Jewish schools and other communal buildings in Britain and elsewhere. It follows the devastating attacks on synagogues in Copenhagen, Denmark in 2015, in Pittsburgh in the United States in 2018, in Poway, California in the United States in 2019, and in Halle, Germany in 2019. The threat is very real, and it's nothing new, of course. Going back to the 1970s, from my own personal experience, I couldn't help be aware of security patrols at synagogues and other Jewish communal buildings and events. It never really crossed my mind growing up that other communities have got no need of those sort of precautions. That's just how Jewish people live in Britain, in Europe, and in lots of other countries. But when you look at the perpetrators of the specific attacks that I just mentioned earlier, you'll find that they come from different and seemingly opposing political traditions: Islamist, Christian fundamentalist, or something we recognise more easily, neo-Nazi. But they've got one thing in common, something that underpins modern anti-Semitism, and that is belief in the Jewish conspiracy theory. And they understand the world through that prism. And I think that's really important to understand that. You know, for us as socialists and communists, we see events and modern history through the prism of class struggle. It's our worldview and it's our ideological framework. But the anti-Semites see events as invariably connected to a Jewish conspiracy. To understand anti-Semitism today, it's essential to understand the Jewish conspiracy theory and the role that anti-Semitism plays as ideology. It's not just prejudice against Jewish people, it's an entire ideology. The same ideology that the Nazis perpetuated and led to the Holocaust and the murder of 6 million Jews, which we're commemorating today. I think previous generations of revolutionaries would likely be surprised that we still have to deal with anti-Semitism in the way that we do, and then we have to talk about it in the way that we do. After all, the forward march of emancipation for Jews after centuries of oppression and the withering away of anti-Semitism could easily have been viewed as inevitable in the wake of the French and the Russian revolutions. The ideas of the Enlightenment, accompanied by industrialization and the ascent of science, seemed to be a sweeping away the old world and the end of oppression, not only for Jews, but for all oppressed minorities. The French Revolution of 1789 heralded the beginning of the emancipation of Jews, and it became a model for the rest of Europe. The Russian Revolution of 1917, that great fact of the 20th century, overthrew a centuries-old regime of official anti-Semitism in the Russian Empire, and the Pale of Settlement, where Jews were only allowed to live in certain areas and suffered much persecution, including massacres. And yet, the most significant text in terms of understanding modern-day anti-Semitism and the Jewish conspiracy theory is actually steeped in that revolutionary period and in counter-revolution. The forgery, The Protocols of the Elders of Zion, was first published in 1903 by supporters of the Tsar, supposedly being the minutes of a meeting of international Jewry secretly conspiring to control the world. And it became a key tool for both discrediting the Russian Revolution and underpinning modern anti-Semitism. Following the revolution, anti-Bolshevik emigres brought the protocols to the West. And soon after, editions circulated across Europe, the United States, South America, and Japan. An Arabic translation first appeared in the 1920s. The American industrialist Henry Ford published the protocols under the title The International Jew, alongside other articles accusing Jews of using communism, banking, trade unions, and modern music to control the world, selling 500,000 copies in the United States alone. The text was translated into 16 languages, including German, and unsurprisingly, Hitler referred to it in Mein Kampf and in his early speeches. Soviet state's response to the counter-revolutionaries' weapon of Jew hatred was to make anti-Semitism, at least officially, a capital offence, no doubt because its main practitioners, the proto-fascist Black Hundreds and their ilk, were the enemies of the revolution and had fought bitterly to prevent it coming about. There's a well-known speech that was recorded for gramophone by Lenin in 1919. You can find it on the internet with English translation underneath. But he says with a lot of gusto, Lenin said this about anti-Semitism. He said, "This is a survival of ancient feudal times, when the priests burned heretics at the stake, when the peasants lived in slavery, and when the people were crushed and inarticulate. This ancient feudal ignorance is passing away. The eyes of the people are being opened." Well, unfortunately, the notion that the feudal ignorance was passing away was brutally put to rest with the Holocaust. Rosa Luxemburg popularized the idea that the world faced socialism or barbarism. And of course, during the Nazi era, it was barbarism that triumphed. Just as the Russian Revolution was the great fact of the 20th century, in a sense, changing everything that had come before, so too was the Holocaust. Jewish life, as it had previously been known, was pretty much wiped out in Europe. The pre-war arguments between Zionists, Bundists, and communists over the future of the Jewish people rendered largely irrelevant by the extermination of entire sections of the community and the new facts on the ground. And these facts were that thousands of Holocaust survivors were in displaced persons camps, with various countries not keen to let them in. Some were attacked when they attempted to return to where they came from. Most infamously, in July 1946, Jews who had returned to Kielce in Poland were subjected to a pogrom in which 42 people were killed. And it was in the wake of these facts that the United Nations recommended in 1947, with the key support of the Soviet Union, the partition of British Mandate Palestine and the creation of two states, one Jewish and one Arab. And this was actually the second time that the Soviet Union had supported the creation of a Jewish homeland. The Soviets had already formed what they hoped would be a homeland for the Jewish people in 1928 in Birobidzhan, near the Russian-Chinese border. But the idea had struggled to become a reality, even though tens of thousands of pioneers and later displaced Jews did make their way there. I think something really crucial to be understood about anti-Semitism is that it can be found anywhere on the political spectrum. I think it's important to understand that and to not just dismiss it as something only of the right, and that we can only recognise when it wears jackboots. After all, we wouldn't do that with any other form of racism. Tragically, even in the Soviet Union, that great beacon of hope to all oppressed people worldwide, the country that broke the back of Nazism and lost 20 million citizens doing it, that liberated Auschwitz and other extermination camps, anti-Semitism still took root. And we know that it took root because in February 1956, at the 20th Congress of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, Nikita Khrushchev sent shockwaves through the international communist movement when he described it amongst the crimes of the Stalin regime. These revelations included a series of anti-Semitic acts, such as the wholesale purges of Jewish party leaders in the socialist countries of Eastern Europe, the general shutdown of Jewish cultural institutions in the Soviet Union after 1948, the murder in August 1952 of Jewish writers and intellectuals, among them the leaders of the Jewish Anti-Fascist Committee, and the Doctors' Plot of 1953, in which Stalin accused a group of mainly Jewish physicians of plotting to murder him on behalf of, in inverted commas, Zionism and Western imperialism. But perhaps we shouldn't be surprised after legislating against anti-Semitism that this could happen. After all, in spite of the emancipation of the Jews in the wake of the French Revolution in 1789, a century later, we saw one of the most notorious cases of anti-Semitism take place with a political scandal that rocked the Republic, the Dreyfus Affair, when the French Jewish army captain was falsely accused of handing secrets to the Germans. There were anti-Jewish riots in 20 cities. It's inevitable and inescapable fact that there's always a spike in anti-Semitism linked to conflict involving Israel. All the statistics show this. There's nothing new about it, though. In the immediate aftermath of the Arab-Israeli Six-Day War in 1967, an anti-Jewish campaign took place in Poland under the guise of being against Zionism and imperialism. The subsequent purges within the Communist Party resulted in the exile of thousands of Jews, including professionals and party officials. It's been estimated that some 25,000 Jews left Poland during the 1968 to 70 period, leaving only 5,000 to 10,000 Jews left in the country. Here in Britain, whenever there's a conflict involving Israel, Jewish people get targeted. In May 2021, when there was an escalation of violence in Israel and Gaza, there was at least a 5-fold increase in reported anti-Semitic incidents in Britain. These included people driving through Jewish areas in North London and North Manchester in convoys, or individually finding Jews to abuse. We're living in an internet age where, and this has been referred to earlier, where conspiracy theories run rampant. And I'm sure that there isn't a single one of us who isn't shocked and disappointed by a friend or a relative who we thought was perfectly sensible until they came out with some aspect of COVID denial or related conspiracy theory, when they seemed perfectly sound on other issues. Because that disappointment is the same feeling you'd have when you hear anti-Semitism from people who you think should know better. In an age of conspiracy theory, the notion that behind the scene, Jews conspire to control the world is the ultimate conspiracy theory, the most all-encompassing conspiracy theory of them all. Today, it's often combined with either Holocaust denial or, more likely, Holocaust relativism. When you think of it like that, it's easy to see how people become susceptible to the Jewish conspiracy theory. In the United States and in Europe, neo-Nazis, white supremacists, and Holocaust deniers endorse and circulate the protocols. Books based on the protocols are available worldwide, even in countries with hardly any Jews, such as Japan. There are school textbooks throughout the Arab and Islamic world that teach the protocols as fact. Countless political speeches, editorials, and even children's cartoons are derived from that source. In 2002, Egypt's government-sponsored television aired a mini-series based on the book. But you don't need the book to circulate comments on the internet with the core notion that there was a hidden hand, a hidden Jewish hand controlling things behind the scenes. From the COVID vaccine to the Grenfell Tower fire, you'll find conspiracy theories relating to them on the internet. Anti-Semitism finds its way into people's thinking where there's an ideological vacuum. The German social democratic leader, August Bebel, eulogized by Lenin as a model workers' leader, famously said, on considering the problem well over 100 years ago, that anti-Semitism was the socialism of fools. And I want to end by saying 3 things about modern anti-Semitism. Firstly, that anti-Semitism is an ideological virus. Secondly, that anyone from anywhere on the political spectrum can be infected by it. And thirdly, it is possible to carry the virus without actually knowing. And on that final point, how do we know if someone is a carrier of the virus without realizing it? If their socialism is the socialism of fools? I think if someone uses the word Zionist as an epithet, and really they mean Jews, then they're carrying the virus. If someone argues that anti-Semitism is a problem of the past and that Jews only raise the issue today for nefarious reasons, then they are carrying the virus. And perhaps crucially, our standards being applied to Jews that they wouldn't apply to anyone else. For example, if someone argues that Israel is uniquely evil and shouldn't exist, but cannot name any other country that shouldn't exist, then they too are carrying the virus. There's no better time than today, on Holocaust Memorial Day, to pledge ourselves to oppose the socialism of fools. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you, Steve, for your contribution to our meeting tonight, and I'm sure it's much food for thought for people. I'll now call upon our second speaker, Mick Costello, who is a former industrial editor at the Morning Star, and is a knowledgeable student of Soviet studies. Mick, the floor is yours. Is Mick there?
No, next speaker.
Okay, thank you very much. Apologies for that, comrades. Well, now it is my honour to welcome Comrade Vladimir Besanov, who is a member, excuse me, of the Communist Party of the Russian Federation. Welcome, comrade, and the floor is yours. Vladimir.
Thank you. Hello, dear comrades. I would like to express my gratitude to the organizers, Robert Griffiths, for the opportunity to speak. I take this opportunity to convey greetings to the participants for the Central Committee of the Communist Party of the Russian Federation and its leader, Gennady Zyuganov. And also express my gratitude for the topic raised, which is relevant today. We remember with you about the inhuman treatment of people, mass killings, and are called upon to prevent this from happening again in the future. The Soviet Union made a decisive contribution to the victory over fascism. In Russia, the Soviet Union, almost every family suffered from the Second World War. My father alone, with his 4-year-old sister, became an orphan when he was 1 year old. His parents, my grandparents, died during the war. I want to touch on the aspect of resistance in concentration camps. So we know of numerous cases of escape organization. We also know the case of the escape of a group of prisoners of a German plane. We must significant what the Buchenwald uprising. For a long time, underground organization collected weapons, grenades. At the end of the war, it was decided to act. The prisoners took power in the camp, lasted 3 days until the approach of British troops. Are modern people able to organize themselves to see threats of gross injustice. I have always said, and I repeat, you and I need to work out the universal requirements of the working class. We are seeing an attack on the rights of workers of technology and machines. Jobs are being cut. Of course, the development of technologies and machines should lead to easier work, shorter working hours, and increase in the purchasing power of workers. And this will undoubtedly happen with the victory of reason on the planet. Thank you for your attention. Glad to see you all. See you soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Comrade Basanov, for your contribution tonight. Very interesting. Okay, we have two further speakers who I want to introduce. It is an honor to welcome Comrade Boris Litvinov, the first secretary of the Communist Party of Donetsk. And with him will be Tatiana Desiotova, who is from the Communist Party of the Russian Federation. She will be translating, but equally she will be making a statement herself. So, comrades, the floor is yours. So, Comrade Litvinov. Where is Comrade Litvinov? Tatiana, do you want to read the statement, because I don't believe your comrade is here. Can you need to unmute yourself? I can't hear you, Tatiana, you're muted. Unmute yourself. We appear to be having some difficulty in this direction. Can the administrator unmute Tatiana, please?
We're trying to now. We're asking her to unmute.
Tatiana, you need to unmute. Can't hear you. Unmute.
I think you've managed to get through to her. Good.
Like this?
Yes, that's the one. Thank you, Tatiana.
That's better. Sorry, there are some technical problems why Boris Litvinov cannot get in touch with you at the moment. But you know, the situation in Donetsk is not easy at the moment. Maybe he will be able to join us later. So as soon as he is able, I shall translate. So meanwhile, I shall read my very short report, which is just one page, about 3 minutes long. So thank you very much for the invitation you sent to the Communist Party of the Russian Federation, which is represented today both by Comrade Vladimir Bessonov and myself. So Comrade Bessonov is a member of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of the Russian Federation and a member of the Parliament of the Russian Federation in the 6th convocation from 2011 till 2016. More than 5 years ago, he had to flee Russia because of the political repressions against the Communist Party in general and him in particular. So there is little chance for him to return to his motherland in the near future, because as soon as he crosses the border, He will be immediately arrested since he faces 3 years of imprisonment. So once again, I would like to express our gratitude that you help him, that you show your solidarity and support him in his difficult situation. So I represent CPRF Moscow Communist Inter-Brigade. So for you to make it clear, it's not a separate party. I would just like to remind you that our Communist Inter-Brigade, which is part of Moscow branch of the Communist Party of the Russian Federation, was born in preparations for the celebrations of the 100th anniversary of the Great October Socialist Revolution, when apart from the official delegations, there were thousands of comrades from all over the world, including volunteers from Britain and Ireland who came to Moscow in 2017. So here's a list of comrades from Britain who came to Moscow. So there is no need here, I believe, to give all the terrible facts and figures about the victims of the Second World War. We all are aware that concentration camps appeared at the beginning of the 20th century, and in Germany they were created long before the war, actually in 1933. This was one of the first things initiated by Hitler, and the first people placed there were communists and all those who opposed the new regime in Germany. The next were Jews, Gypsy, and people of Slavic origin, Untermenschen, as they called them. The Wannsee Conference, held on the 20th of January 1942 by Nazi, approved the decision of finally getting rid of Jews, including on the territory of many European countries. I dare remind you that today we celebrate the day of lifting the blockade of Leningrad, which lasted for 900 days, from the 8th of September 1941 till the 27th of January 1944, when more than 1.5 million people died. It is most regretful that only after decades after the Great Victory, nearly 1/3 of the population of, so to speak, civilized countries are absolutely unaware of these figures and the price that humanity paid for its liberation. Moreover, nowadays there are plenty of attempts of fraud and forgery about this war. To make it worse, neo-fascism and Nazism is raising its head, which is hair-raising experience for the veterans and all those who survived. Actually, we can see it in many Baltic countries, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia especially, when they celebrate and bring flowers to SS leaders. You know that in 2020, the Communist Party of the Russian Federation initiated the international conference dedicated to the 75th anniversary of the end of the Second World War and the 150th anniversary of Lenin's birth, which was to be held in Moscow. It is postponed but not cancelled. So we do hope that a day will come when we meet again and discuss all the alarming issues and pay tribute to all those who perished and who gave their lives for a better future. Long live international solidarity. Thank you.
Thank you, Tatiana. Can I suggest that, given Comrade Litvinov is having difficulty technically, that you read his words, which I understand you have, to the meeting so that we don't miss out on what he had to say. Could you do that?
Unfortunately, I do not have. I have Comrade Bessonov speech, but not Comrade Litvinov. So what we may do is that I shall later translate his report and send you by email. So at the moment, this is the only way out, I'm afraid.
Okay, thank you very much, Tatiana, for doing that, and I'm sure we can make great use of that information. And thank you to you and Comrade Bessonov for spending the time this evening addressing us. Thank you very much. We appear to have technical difficulties, and Comrade Boris Litvinov is unable to attend, but you heard the words from Tatiana that she will be translating it and sending it on so that we can circulate it at a later date. To end our meeting, Professor Mary Davis will read a few verses of Isaac Pfeiffer's 1941 poem, I Am a Jew. Mary, the floor is yours. Sorry about my pronunciation.
Isaac Pfeffer was a communist and a prominent Russian Jewish Yiddish-speaking poet. He came to England with another comrade in 1943 to raise money for the Soviet war effort. He and another comrade spoke at mass meetings. The last one, including in America and in London, the last meeting that he addressed in London was attended by the then chief rabbi, Dr. Joseph Hertz. Hertz was a patron of the Jewish Fund for Soviet Russia. Hertz was moved to tears when Pfeffer recited this, his famous poem, Ich bin a Yid, I am a Jew. It's a long poem, I'll only read 4 verses. There's a reference in one of the verses to 2 men, Gorelik and Papernik. These men were Jewish Red Army officers who were both decorated as heroes of the Soviet Union. Papernik, in fact, was given the Order of Lenin. So, Pfeffer's poem, Ich bin ein Yid. From London comes the response to me from Buenos Aires and New York, come songs from Jews who fight and work, and even from the burning hell comes a shuddering I know well. In them, all one word runs through, I am a Jew. I am a Jew who has drunk up happiness from Stalin's cup. To those who would let Moscow go under the ground, I call out, no, the Slavs are my brothers too. I am a Jew. I am not alone. My strength is growing. Battle is now my daily bread. I send the storm raging and blowing, and the brown army falls dead. Gorodik and Papernik too cry from under the earth, I am a Jew. Despite the foe who comes destroying, under the red flag I shall live. I shall plant vineyards for my enjoying. Whatever, and on this soil I will thrive, whatever the enemy may do. The liberty of the world shall save. I shall dance on Hitler's grave. I am a Jew.
Thank you, Mary, for your reading. Very, very appropriate for tonight, I think. Well, that, comrades, brings us to the end of our listed speakers and readings. So it is for me to say to you, thank you for attending. And I would like to leave you with this message. Let us leave this meeting tonight committed to the redoubling of our efforts to oppose fascism, anti-Semitism, and all forms of racism. Every single one of us can play a role, however small, in tackling the poison that infects people from the fascist threat and from the racism threat. So please do what you can, and thank you very much for attending tonight. Oh, and I forgot just to remind everybody, Manchester Communist Party and the YCL are hosting an event this Sunday on historical revisionism, Holocaust denial, and the conspiracy theory. So if you look on the chat, you'll be able to find the details. Thank you very much to everybody for attending.